The rain in Atlanta doesn't just fall. It drums a rhythm against the glass, a steady, hypnotic beat that usually signaled the safest time of Aerys Monroe's day. It was barely dawn. The street lights were still humming, casting long, wet reflections on the pavement outside Sweet Dreams Bakery. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of Madagascar vanilla and blooming yeast. This was her kingdom. It was small, barely 400 square feet of customer space, but it was hers. Aerys moved with the practiced grace of a woman who knew every inch of her domain. Her hand steady as she placed a single crystallized sugar violet atop a lemon chiffon cupcake. It was her signature. Delicate, precise, unassuming. She loved these hours before the world woke up, before the bell on the door jingled, before the demands of the day began, before she had to go home to a husband who looked at her business and saw only a cute hobby. Here, in the quiet hum of the convection ovens, she was competent. She was an artist. She wiped a smudge of flour from the stainless steel counter, admiring the rows of pastries that represented her entire life's work. She had no idea that in exactly 10 seconds, this small, comfortable life would be incinerated. The telephone on the wall rang. It was a harsh, mechanical sound that sliced through the scent of cinnamon and peace. Aerys frowned. It was 7:30 in the morning. Customers didn't call this early. Vendors usually texted. A prickle of unease ran down her spine, the kind of instinctual warning that prey animals feel before the shadow of a hawk passes over them. She wiped her hands on her apron, the cotton fabric rough against her palms, and lifted the receiver. Sweet Dreams Bakery. Aerys speaking. Her voice was light, automatic, hiding the sudden tightness in her chest. Double quotes, Mrs. Monroe. The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and stripped of any morning warmth. It was the voice of expensive suits and billable hours. This is Barclay Quinn. I am the senior partner at Quinn, Owen & Associates. Aerys felt her hand tighten around the phone cord. She knew the name. Everyone in Atlanta who mattered knew the name, but she knew it for a different reason. Barclay Quinn was her lawyer. Her godmother's lawyer. Mr. Quinn, she breathed, her eyes darting to the window where the rain was intensifying. Is this about Aerys? A heavy silence hung on the line, weighted with the formality of death. Aerys Holloway had been gone for 3 weeks. Aerys had attended the funeral, a grand, somber affair filled with the city's elite politicians, critics. Celebrities, people who had dined at Aerys's table but didn't know her heart. Since that day, Aerys had buried herself in flour and sugar, trying to outrun the grief, trying to forget that the only mother figure she had ever truly known was gone. It is, Quinn replied, his tone softening just a fraction, though the professional edge remained. We need to meet. Aerys, immediately. It concerns the final reading of Ms. Holloway's will and the disposition of her estate. I can come next week, Aerys stammered, looking at the trays of unbaked croissants. I have a wedding order to finish, and Mrs. Monroe, Quinn cut her off. It wasn't rude, but it was final. You don't understand? This cannot wait until next week. The assets involved require immediate management. We are not talking about a box of jewelry or a collection of old letters. We are talking about the operational transfer of a multi-million-dollar entity. Aerys froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The hum of the refrigerator sounded suddenly like a roar in her ears. Entity. She whispered, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. I don't understand. Aerys never mentioned. Aerys Holloway was a woman of secrets. Aerys, you know that? Quinn said. And for the first time there was a trace of exhaustion in his voice. She has left you the entirety of her estate. And that includes the controlling interest and sole ownership of the legacy crown. The receiver slipped against her ear. Aerys had to grab the counter to steady herself. One of the lemon cupcakes she had just frosted was knocked by her elbow, tumbling in slow motion to the floor, landing face down, a ruined masterpiece. She didn't even look at it. The legacy crown, it wasn't just a restaurant. In Atlanta, it was an institution. It was the place where governors celebrated victories and where marriage proposals were made under the light of crystal chandeliers imported from Paris. It was a sprawling, legendary establishment that employed over 50 people, held a wine cellar worth more than Aerys's entire house, and generated revenue that most small businesses wouldn't see in a decade. Aerys had built it from nothing, turning it into a fortress of fine dining over 30 years of blood, sweat, and iron-willed perfectionism. "There must be a mistake," Kara said, her voice trembling so hard she could barely form the syllables. "Mr. Quinn, I run a bakery. I sell muffins and birthday cakes. The Legacy Crown, that's a $5 million operation. I can't. The valuation is actually closer to $7 million, including the real estate and the brand equity." Quinn corrected her with terrifying precision. "And there is no mistake. Aerys was incredibly specific. She drafted the final codicils 6 months ago, right after her diagnosis became terminal. She was lucid, she was determined, and she was adamant. She didn't leave it to her head chef. She didn't leave it to a management trust. She left it to you." Aerys looked around her bakery. Suddenly, the cozy yellow walls felt suffocating. The contrast was violent. She was standing in a shop where she worried about the price of butter going up by 50 cents, while a man on the phone was handing her the keys to an empire. Why? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Why me?" "Because," Quinn said, his voice dropping to a register that sounded almost like a warning, "she believed you were the only one who wouldn't sell out. She believed you were the only one with the heart to protect it. But Aerys, you need to listen to me carefully. An inheritance of this magnitude, it draws attention. It draws wolves. We need to sign the transfer documents before the news becomes public. You need to come to my office now." Aerys hung up the phone. She stood in the silence of her bakery, the smell of vanilla now cloying and sickeningly sweet. She looked down at the ruined cupcake on the floor. $7 million. The Legacy Crown. It was a gift, but as the rain battered against the glass, it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a target had just been painted on her back. She untied her apron, her fingers numb, unaware that she was about to walk out of her simple life and into a war zone she wasn't prepared to fight. The drive home from Berkeley Quinn's office was a blur of gray asphalt and racing thoughts. On the passenger seat beside her lay a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the Quinn and Associates seal. Inside were the deeds, the trust documents, and the terrified realization that Aerys Monroe was now worth more money than she could count. She kept glancing at it, half expecting it to vanish like smoke. She needed Jarvis. She needed his arms around her, his steady voice telling her that it wasn't a mistake, that she wasn't an imposter, that they would figure this out together. For 6 years, Jarvis had been her anchor. Or so she thought. It was noon when she pulled into the driveway of their modest suburban bungalow. The rain had stopped, leaving the air humid and heavy. Aerys frowned as her headlights swept across the garage door. Jarvis's sedan was parked there, gleaming wetly. He should have been at his architectural firm across town. He never came home for lunch. A knot of anxiety, tighter than the one she'd felt at the lawyer's office, formed in her stomach. Had something happened? Was he sick? She unlocked the front door, the keys jingling loudly in the sudden silence of the house. "Jarvis," she called out, stepping into the hallway. "Honey, are you home? I have news." There was no answer, just the faint clink of glass against glass coming from the living room. Aerys walked down the hall, clutching her purse and the heavy envelope inside it like a shield. She found him sitting on the beige sofa, his tie loosened, his suit jacket thrown carelessly over the armrest. On the coffee table in front of him sat a bottle of single malt whiskey and a half-empty tumbler. It was 12:15 in the afternoon. He didn't look up when she entered. He was staring at the amber liquid in his glass, swirling it slowly, hypnotically. "Jarvis," Aerys asked, her voice trembling, "why aren't you at work?" He finally raised his head. The expression on his face stopped her cold. It wasn't concern. It wasn't the warm, goofy smile he usually gave her. It was a look of intense, almost feverish calculation. His eyes were bright, too bright, like a man who had just won a high-stakes bet he hadn't told anyone he was placing. My mother called me, he said, his voice smooth, lacking any of the surprise Karis felt. She had lunch with Mrs. Vanderwall today. Apparently, Mrs. Vanderwall's husband plays golf with one of the partners at Quinn's firm. Small world, isn't it, Karis? Karis felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't even had the chance to process the inheritance herself. And the news was already circulating through the grapevine of Atlanta's elite. Jarvis, I was going to tell you tonight. I just came from the lawyer. It's overwhelming. Aerys left me everything. She took a step toward him, expecting him to stand up to bridge the distance between them. Instead, he took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes tracking her every movement. Everything, he repeated, tasting the word. The restaurant. The building. The brand. Mom says the real estate alone is prime downtown footage. She says we're sitting on a gold mine. We thought the word hung in the air, sharp and discordant. Karis paused. Jarvis, it's not just a gold mine. It's Aerys's life. She left it to me to protect it. To run it. Jarvis let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. He set the glass down with a heavy thud. Run it. You. He stood up then, unfolding his tall frame, and for the first time in their marriage, Karis felt small in his presence. He walked toward her, not with affection, but with the stride of someone inspecting a new acquisition. A carriage. Let's be realistic, he said, his tone dripping with a condescension she had never heard before. Or perhaps she had, and she had just been too in love to notice it. You run a bakery? You make muffins for soccer moms. The legacy crown is a shark tank. It's unions, it's supply chains, it's Michelin star pressure. You'd be eaten alive in a week. I know how to bake, Jarvis. I know food. She defended herself, her grip on her purse tightening until her knuckles turned white. Aerys taught me. She believed in me. Aerys was a senile old woman who made a sentimental mistake. Jarvis snapped, the mask slipping further. The cruelty in his voice struck Karis like a physical blow. But luckily, you have us. You have family. He reached out and placed his hands on her shoulders. His grip was firm, possessive. I've already been looking at the numbers, Karis. If we leverage the restaurant's assets, we can expand. We can franchise. Mom has ideas, brilliant ideas. She's always wanted to get into the hospitality industry. This is it. This is our ticket to the big leagues. Karis pulled back slightly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Your mother. Jarvis, Aerys couldn't stand your mother. She would never want Tamsin anywhere near the legacy crown. Jarvis's face hardened. The bright excitement in his eyes cooled into something steelier, something dangerous. Don't be selfish, Karis. We are married. That means what's yours is ours. This isn't just about your little hobby anymore. This is about our future. My mother is coming over for dinner tonight to discuss the strategy. We need to move fast before the staff starts to panic. I haven't agreed to any of this, Karis whispered, horror dawning on her. I am the owner. The deed is in my name. Jarvis took a step closer, invading her personal space, his whiskey-tainted breath washing over her face. And you are my wife. Do you really think you can handle lawyers, unions, and the press by yourself? Look at you, Karis. You're shaking. You need us. You need me to take this burden off your shoulders so you can go back to your ... baking. He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile, the look of a man who sees a wounded animal and calls it an opportunity. Go freshen up, darling. Mom will be here at 6. And where is something nice? We're celebrating our new fortune. He turned his back on her and poured another drink, already dismissing her from the room. Dismissing her from the decision, dismissing her from her own inheritance. Karis stood in the doorway, clutching the envelope that felt heavier by the second. She realized with a chilling clarity that the man standing by the window wasn't the husband she had married. That man had been an illusion. This man, this greedy, dismissive stranger, was the reality. And he didn't just want to help her. He wanted to consume her. The silence in the dining room was a physical weight. pressing against Karis's chest until it became difficult to breathe. Tamsin's manicured finger was still tapping against the contract. A rhythmic, impatient sound like a clock ticking down to an execution. "Sign it, dear." The words echoed in Karis's ears, stripped of any pretense of love. They didn't want her partnership. They wanted her erasure. "I need a moment," Karis managed to say, pushing her chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, a harsh noise that made Jarvis wince. "Karis, really?" Jarvis sighed, rubbing his temples as if her hesitation was a migraine he had to endure. "There isn't anything to think about. We've done the thinking for you." "I need to use the restroom," she lied, clutching her purse to her side. "I'll be right back." Before Tamsin could object, before Jarvis could stand up to block her path, Karis turned and walked swiftly out of the room. She didn't run. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her panic, but her steps were quick. Fueled by an instinct for self-preservation, she slipped into the guest bathroom, down the hall, and through the deadbolt. The click of the lock was the most comforting sound she had heard all day. She leaned back against the cool wood of the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was cornered. They were right in a cruel, twisted way. She didn't know how to fight lawyers. She didn't know how to negotiate with unions. She was just a baker. She was just Karis. Her hand trembled as she reached into her purse. Tucked behind the terrifying legal deeds and the heavy trust documents was a smaller, simpler envelope. It was lilac-colored, made of thick, textured paper that smelled faintly of dried lavender and old books. On the front, in shaky but elegant cursive, was written simply, "To my dearest Karis." She hadn't opened it at the lawyer's office. It had felt too private, too raw. But now, trapped in her own home by the people who were supposed to love her, she needed Aerys. She needed to hear her voice one last time. Karis slid her finger under the flap, tearing the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the single sheet of stationery inside. She unfolded it, and there in ink that looked like it had been pressed into the page with great effort were the final words of the Matriarch of Atlanta Dining. "My brave, beautiful girl," the letter began. Karis felt tears prick her eyes instantly. "If you are reading this, the silence has finally taken me. Do not weep for me, child. I have lived a life full of flavor, fire, and no regrets. But I did not leave you the legacy crown just to give you a fortune. I left it to you because you are the only one who understands that a restaurant is not a business, it is a heartbeat." Karis wiped a tear from her cheek, her vision blurring. She read on, and as she did, the tone of the letter shifted. The warmth evaporated, replaced by the steel-spined pragmatism that had made Aerys a legend. "I know you are afraid. You are wondering why I've burdened you with this. You are thinking you are not strong enough. But I also know the world, Karis, and I know the people in it. I know that success draws envy like sugar draws flies. I suspect that by the time you read this, there are already voices in your ear telling you that you are incompetent, telling you that you are small, telling you to hand over the keys." Karis gasped softly. It was as if Aerys was standing in the room with her, looking through the walls at Tamsin and Jarvis sitting in the dining room. "I have watched your husband. Karis and I have watched his mother. They are people who mistake price for value. They see my restaurant as a bank account, not a legacy. I knew they would come for it. I knew they would try to take it from you the moment I was in the ground." Karis felt a chill run down her spine. Aerys had known. She had watched for years, seeing the greed hidden behind Jarvis's smiles and Tamsin's polite nods. She had known this moment would come, and she hadn't left Karis defenseless. "Listen to me closely, my dear. Do not fear their ambition. Let them think they are smarter than you. Let them think they have one. Because I have prepared for this. The legacy crown is a complex machine, and I have removed the engine. Not all the assets were in the main deed you received today. There are separate arrangements, details that only Barclay Quinn knows. Safeguards I built into the foundation of my empire to ensure that if the wrong hands ever touched my creation, they would grasp nothing but air." Karis reread the sentence, her heart skipping a beat. Safeguards. separate arrangements. The letter ended with a final, cryptic instruction. If they force your hand, let them. If they demand control, give it to them. But keep this letter and keep your faith. When the time is right, go back to Berkeley. He holds the second key. Remember, Aerys, the crown is heavy, but it only fits the head that knows how to wear it. Believe in yourself as I believe in you. Aerys. Aerys lowered the letter, pressing it against her chest. The panic that had been suffocating her moments ago began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Aerys hadn't just left her a restaurant. She had left her a trap. She had baited the hook for Tamsin and Jarvis long before she died. A knock on the bathroom door made her jump. Aerys. Jarvis's voice was muffled, laced with irritation. Mom is waiting. The food is getting cold. Aerys looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red, her face pale. But there was something new in her expression. A hardness around the mouth. A spark of dangerous knowledge in her eyes. She carefully folded the lilac letter and tucked it into her bra, right against her heart, where they couldn't find it. I'm coming, she called out. Her voice was steady. She unlocked the door. She wasn't the scared baker anymore. She was Aerys Holloway's goddaughter, and she was walking back into the lion's den with a weapon they couldn't see. She would play their game. She would let them think she was weak. Because now she knew something they didn't. The legacy crown was rigged to blow. And Tamsin Niles was about to light the fuse herself. Aerys did not scream. She did not flip the table. She simply stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked out of the dining room, leaving her husband and mother-in-law to their champagne and their delusions. She packed a small bag, took her keys, and drove straight to the only place that still felt real. The back room of Sweet Dreams Bakery. That night, she slept on a narrow cot surrounded by flour sacks. But for the first time in weeks, she slept soundly. She knew something they didn't. She knew that the document she had signed was a fuse. And she was already miles away from the explosion. The next morning, the destruction of the legacy crown began exactly as Aerys had predicted. Aerys didn't need to be there to see it. She had eyes on the inside. Chef Bram Cassidy, a man who had cooked for presidents and possessed a temper as fiery as his stovetop, became her informant. He met her secretly by the river at dawn, his face a mask of fury. She fired Liam. Bram spat, pacing back and forth on the damp grass. First thing she did, walked into the kitchen at 8 a.m., wearing high heels on the non-slip mats, and told my sous chef of 10 years that his salary was bloated. Then she looked at the menu. She called the Wagyu beef excessive and asked why we didn't serve chicken fingers for the children. Aerys listened, sipping her coffee, her face unreadable. And what did you do, Bram? I almost quit on the spot, he growled. But I remembered what you said. I waited. But Aerys, the staff is terrified. Nita says cancellations are already rolling in. Tamsin is calling vendors and demanding price cuts, insulting people Aerys worked with for decades. She's burning bridges faster than we can build them. Let her, Aerys said softly. Let her burn it all down. Bram looked at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. You want the restaurant to fail? I want the infection to be exposed, Aerys corrected. If I step in now, they'll blame me for the chaos. They'll say I didn't support them. But if I wait, if I let Tamsin's ego run its course, the world will see exactly who killed the legacy crown. Skala was spectacular. It happened in slow motion, day by agonizing day. Tamsin, drunk on power, replaced the fresh seafood vendor with a budget supplier owned by a friend of hers. The reviews were instantaneous and brutal. The crown has lost its shine, wrote the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. From fine dining to freezer burn. Jarvis showed up at the bakery on the 5th day. He looked haggard, his suit rumpled, the arrogance of the dining room replaced by a frantic, sweaty desperation. You have to talk to Bram, he pleaded, standing amidst the smell of fresh bread that he had once mocked. He's refusing to cook the new menu. He's sabotaging Mom. He's maintaining standards. Jarvis Aerys replied, not looking up from the dough she was kneading. She didn't offer him a chair. She didn't offer him coffee. She was busy. Mom is stressed, Karis. She's trying to modernize, but these employees are stubborn. You need to go down there and tell them to fall in line. Tell them you support her." Karis finally stopped. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked at her husband. Really looked at him. She saw a weak man who had sold his wife for his mother's approval. And now that the bill was coming due, he couldn't pay it. "I can't do that," she said calmly. "I signed the power of attorney, remember? Total control. That's what you wanted. You told me I was incompetent. You told me to let the adults handle the business. So handle it, Jarvis." He left, slamming the door, but Karis didn't flinch. She just went back to work. She knew the end was coming. Tamsin had made the fatal mistake of arrogance. She believed she was the source of the restaurant's power, unaware that the true power lay in the assets she didn't technically own. And while Tamsin was fighting with Yelp reviewers and firing waiters, Karis was quietly meeting with Barclay Quinn, preparing to pull the trigger on the trap Aerys had set. The silence wasn't surrender. It was the deep breath before the kill. The end of Tamsin's reign did not come with a whimper. It came with the screech of air brakes. It was 4 p.m. on a Friday, the calm before the dinner rush, when 3 unmarked box trucks pulled up to the curb of the Legacy Crown inside the dining room. Tamsin was in the middle of berating a terrified hostess for the lack of reservations. She stopped mid-sentence, frowning as the heavy oak doors swung open. She expected a customer. Instead, she got a grim-faced procession. Barclay Quinn walked in first, holding a clipboard like a weapon. Behind him were 6 men in gray jumpsuits, their hands gloved, their faces impassive. "What is the meaning of this?" Tamsin demanded, marching over to them, her heels clicking aggressively on the parquet floor. "We open in an hour. Get these men out of my lobby immediately." Berkeley didn't stop walking until he was standing right in front of her. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who was about to deliver a very necessary lesson in contract law. "Mrs. Niles," he said, his voice carrying easily to the back of the room where Jarvis was hiding. "We are not here to dine. We are here to repossess. Tamsin laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "I am the operating manager. I sign the lease. I control this building." "You do control the building," Barclay agreed pleasantly. "You have the lease for the 4 walls and the roof. But you do not own what is inside them." He signaled to the movers. 2 of them headed straight for the glass-walled wine cellar, the jewel of the restaurant. "Stop," Tamsin shrieked, lunging forward. "That wine is inventory. That is worth $250,000. "Correction," Berkeley said, stepping in her path. "That wine is the private property of the Holloway Vintage Trust, a separate legal entity formed by Aerys Holloway 5 years ago. The sole beneficiary of that trust is Karis Monroe. You have no rights to it." Tamsin froze. "What?" "And the kitchen," Barclay continued, checking items off his list. "The convection ovens, the walk-in freezers, the sous vide machines, all leased through Holloway Equipment Holdings. Also owned solely by Karis Monroe. The lease has been terminated due to breach of management standards. We are taking them back." Jarvis emerged from the shadows, his face pale. "You can't do this. We have a dinner service in an hour. You can't take the stoves." "I'm afraid I can," Barclay said, handing Jarvis a copy of the seizing order. "Your wife signed the power of attorney, giving you control of the restaurant operations, Jarvis. But she retained ownership of the assets. Aerys knew exactly what she was doing. She separated the body from the soul. You stole the body, but you forgot to check who owned the heart." The sound of clinking glass filled the room as the movers began emptying the cellar. Bottles of 1982 Bordeaux, rare vintages that Aerys had collected for decades, were packed into foam crates. In the kitchen, the sound of heavy machinery being unbolted from the floor vibrated through the walls. "This is theft," Tamsin screamed, her composure shattering completely. "I will sue. I will ruin her." "You will do nothing," Barclay said, his voice turning cold. "Because there is one last thing, the name. The Legacy Crown. It is a trademarked intellectual property, and you are currently infringing on it. As of this moment, You are forbidden from using the name, the logo, or any of Aerys Holloway's recipes. He looked around the beautiful dining room, which was rapidly being stripped of everything that made it valuable. You wanted a restaurant, Mrs. Niles? You have one. You have an empty room with no wine, no equipment, no chef, and no name. Good luck with the dinner rush. Barkley turned on his heel and walked out, followed by this steady stream of movers carrying away the legacy Tamsin thought she had stolen. Jarvis slumped into a chair, watching the movers cart away the espresso machine. He looked at his mother, who was standing in the center of the emptying room, trembling with impotent rage. They had won the battle for the deed, but they had just lost the war. They were standing in a hollow shell, and somewhere across town, Aerys Monroe was holding all the pieces that actually mattered. The silence of a dead restaurant is louder than any scream. By 7 p.m., the time when the legacy crown should have been a symphony of clinking silverware and laughter, the dining room was a tomb. The sunset bled through the windows, casting long, accusing shadows across the empty floor where the tables used to sit. The kitchen, once the beating heart of the establishment, was now just a hollow echo chamber of stripped pipes and bare walls. Tamsin. Niles sat on one of the few remaining built-in benches, a solitary figure in the wreckage of her own ambition. There was no crystal glassware left to drink from, so she nursed a bottle of store-bought vodka in a paper cup. Her perfectly sprayed hair was disheveled, strands falling across a face that had aged 10 years in 10 hours. Jarvis stood near the entrance, staring at his phone. It had been ringing non-stop for 2 hours. Vendors demanding payment for broken contracts. The bank inquiring about the high-interest loan Tamsin had taken out against her own home to fund the renovations. The staff threatening lawsuits for wrongful termination. We're ruined, Tamsin whispered, her voice rasping in the dark room. She didn't sound like the imperious matriarch anymore. She sounded like a frightened child who had broken a priceless vase. The loan, Jarvis. I put the house up as collateral. If we can't generate revenue by Monday, I lose everything. Jarvis looked at his mother, and for the first time, the spell broke. He didn't see a business genius. He saw a gambler who had bet his life on a hand she didn't know how to play. And he saw himself the fool who had handed her the chips. You have to call her, Jarvis said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. No, Tamsin snapped, though there was no heat in it. I will not beg that. That baker, we don't have a choice. Jarvis shouted, his voice cracking. Look around you, Mother. We have a building we can't cook in, a brand we can't use, and debt we can't pay. Aerys holds the cards. She holds all the cards. Aerys played us for fools, and we walked right into it. He didn't wait for her permission. He dialed the number he had deleted from his favorites list only a week ago. His thumb hovered over the call button, shaking. The humiliation was a physical pain, a tightening in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He had told her she was incompetent. He had told her she was nothing. And now she was his only hope. The phone rang 4 times. Jarvis held his breath, terrified she wouldn't answer, terrified she would. Hello? Her voice was cool, detached, like the surface of a deep lake. It wasn't the voice of his wife. It was the voice of the owner of the Holloway assets. Jarvis choked out. It's me. It's Jarvis. I know who it is. Jarvis, she replied. I'm busy. Make it quick. We need to talk, he stammered, pacing the empty lobby. Please. It's a disaster here. The lawyers took everything. Mom is not well. We made a mistake, Aerys. A terrible mistake. You didn't make a mistake. Aerys corrected him, her tone cutting through his excuses. You made a choice. You chose greed over loyalty. And now you are living with the result. I know, okay? Jarvis was crying now, the tears of a man who realizes too late what he has thrown away. Just tell us what you want. We'll do anything. We'll sign the management back to you. Just bring the equipment back, please. Don't let us lose the house. There was a long silence on the other end. Jarvis closed his eyes, praying for mercy from the woman he had betrayed. I am not coming back to that building. Jarvis, Aerys said finally. The legacy crown is dead. You killed it. Then help us, he begged, his dignity completely gone. Tell us what to do. If you want to talk, she said, you can come to me. I'm at the old 4th Ward, number 19, and Jarvis. Bring your mother. If she wants to save her house, she needs to learn how to ask for help properly. The line went dead. Jarvis lowered the phone, looking at Tamsin. She was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. Get up, he said, holding out a hand to her. We're going to see Aerys to apologize, Tamsin asked weakly. No, Jarvis said, opening the door to the humid Atlanta night. To surrender. While the legacy crown sat rotting in silence, its windows dark and its soul stripped bare, 5 miles away. The old 4th Ward was vibrating with the sound of rebirth. Number 19 was not a grand imposing fortress like the crown. It was an old industrial space, characterized by exposed brick walls, soaring arched windows, and floors made of reclaimed heart pine that creaked with history. It was rougher, warmer, and infinitely more alive inside. The air was already thick with a scent of roasted garlic, rosemary, and the sharp, clean smell of lemon zest. This was no longer a construction site. It was a symphony of controlled chaos, and Aerys Monroe was the conductor. She stood in the center of the open-concept dining room, not hiding behind an office door like Tamsin, but right in the thick of it. She was wearing a simple linen apron over her clothes, her hair tied back, a clipboard in one hand and a tasting spoon in the other. Chef, Bram Cassidy called out from the open kitchen. It was the first time he had used that title for her, and he didn't say it with hesitation. He said it with respect. The lamb reduction. It needs your palate. Aerys walked over to the pass. The kitchen, the very same kitchen that had been unbolted from the crown just 24 hours ago, was humming with life. The stainless steel shone under the Edison bulbs. The convection ovens, rescued from Tamsin's incompetence, were already preheating. Aerys dipped the spoon into the sauce, tasting it thoughtfully. It's deep, she said, meeting Bram's eyes, but it needs brightness. A touch of pomegranate molasses. Aerys always liked that tart finish against the fat. Bram grinned, a genuine crinkle-eyed smile that hadn't been seen in weeks. Pomegranate. Heard, Chef? Around them, the staff moved like a single organism. These were the men and women Tamsin had fired, the people she had called bloated overhead. Here, they were family. Nita was organizing the front of house, placing the repossessed wine bottles into the new custom-built rack that lined the back wall. The bottles of 1982 Bordeaux sparkled like jewels finding their way home. There was no fear here. There was no walking on eggshells. There was only the electric excitement of building something that mattered. Aerys looked around the room. She hadn't just copied the legacy crown, she had evolved it. The white tablecloths were gone, replaced by polished wood. The stiff, formal atmosphere was replaced by a welcoming glow. But the heart, the dedication to perfection was exactly the same. Above the entrance, the sign painter was just finishing the gold leaf on the glass. Aerys's legacy. It wasn't a revenge restaurant. It was a sanctuary. The doorbell chimed, a soft, welcoming sound that cut through the clatter of prep work. Aerys turned. Standing in the doorway were Jarvis and Tamsin. They looked out of place in this warm, vibrant world. They were gray, diminished figures, carrying the scent of failure on their clothes. Jarvis stopped just inside the threshold, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. He saw the equipment he had tried to keep. He saw the wine he had tried to sell. But mostly, he saw his wife. He saw the way the staff looked at her, not with fear, but with adoration. He saw the way she stood, shoulders back, radiating a quiet power that he had never bothered to notice in 6 years of marriage. He realized then that he had never really known Aerys Monroe. He had married a baker, but he was looking at a queen. Aerys handed her clipboard to Nita and wiped her hands on her apron. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply walked toward them, crossing the floor of the empire she had built from the ashes of their betrayal. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the red rims of Tamsin's eyes. "Welcome to Aerys's legacy," Kara said, her voice calm and absolute. "You wanted to talk? We can talk. But understand one thing before we sit down. You are guests in my house now, and in this house, we play by my rules." The negotiation did not take long. Desperation rarely haggles well. In the quiet of the private office, Tamsin Niles signed the papers that Karis placed before her. She didn't read the fine print. She didn't argue terms. She simply signed a lease agreement that allowed her to rent the empty shell of the Crown building for a modest bistro. A far cry from the empire she had tried to steal. She was no longer the owner. She was a tenant. And her landlord was the woman she had called a simple baker. When the ink was dry, Karis didn't ask them to leave. Instead, she invited them to table 5, the corner table by the window that offered the best view of the bustling dining room. It was a cruel kindness. From there, Jarvis and Tamsin were forced to watch what they had thrown away. They watched the servers gliding between tables with plates of exquisite food. They watched the critics nodding in approval. They watched the light of the chandeliers reflect in the eyes of happy guests. Karis signaled to Edward the sommelier. He approached the table not with a menu, but with a specific bottle cradled in his arm like a newborn. It was the 1982 Bordeaux, the same vintage Tamsin had ordered to be sold off in bulk to pay for her renovations. The same bottle Aerys had saved for a victory that never came during her lifetime. Edward uncorked it with a soft pop that sounded like a punctuation mark on the end of an era. He poured 2 glasses. One for Jarvis. One for Karis. This was Aerys's favorite, Kara said, lifting her glass. Her voice was gentle, devoid of any malice. She always said that wine, like people, reveals its true character only under pressure. Some turn to vinegar. Some turn to silk. Jarvis looked at the dark red liquid, then up at his wife. He saw the ring on her finger, the one he had given her, but it looked different now. It didn't look like a claim of ownership. It looked like a piece of jewelry she wore out of habit, an accessory to a life that no longer required him. "Karis," he whispered, his voice trembling. Is there a way back? Not for the restaurant. For us." Karis took a slow sip of the wine. She let the silence stretch between them, filling the space with the sounds of her success, the laughter of the diners, the clatter of the kitchen, the music of a business thriving against all odds. "I don't know, Jarvis," she answered honestly, setting the glass down. "I am not the woman you married 6 years ago. That woman needed you to defend her. That woman needed your permission to dream. I don't need those things anymore." She stood up. The movement was fluid, commanding. She didn't look down at him. She looked out at the room, at the world she had built with her own 2 hands and her godmother's ghost guiding her. "Enjoy the wine," she said, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. It wasn't a caress. It was a dismissal. "I have a restaurant to run." She walked away, moving into the crowd of diners who greeted her with smiles and outstretched hands. Jarvis watched her go. He watched her laugh with a senator at the next table. He watched her taste a sauce at the pass and nod to Bram. He watched her shine, so brightly that it hurt his eyes. He took a sip of the wine. It was complex, rich, and painfully expensive. It tasted like regret. Karis never looked back. She didn't need to. She knew that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies. It was outgrowing them. She had Aerys's legacy in her heart, the keys to her own kingdom in her pocket. And for the first time in her life, the future didn't look like a question mark. It looked like a promise.